Great to hear this buzz. This is fabulous. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed lunch and everybody got to the poster session. It did feel that everybody was in that room. Okay. I am absolutely honored to introduce our keynote speaker. And she gave a talk, one of our distinguished lecturers, for the New England Botanical Club a couple of years ago, and we thought it was such a fabulous talk that we invite her back to do it again with flourish. So you should find this very interesting. This is Dr. Pamela Diggle. She is not a very busy person at all. She is Editor-in-Chief, American Journal of Botany, past President of the Botanical Society of America, Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at the University of Connecticut, and Associate Department Head, right? And when she sleeps, I have no idea. You can figure that out. She is going to give a great talk on learned societies, past, present, and future.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try the Elizabeth, and can you hear me if I walk out here? In the back? Yes? Okay, it depends on how, whether I need some crutches up there for my notes or not, so I may come out here as well. So anyways, I'm just so delighted to be here. I've only been in New England for 2 years, and one of the very first things that happened is that Elizabeth and Nancy reached out from the and Brian from the New England Botanical Club and invited me to become a member, and which just felt so welcoming. And now I've had this tremendous opportunity to learn so much more about the New England flora, and I'm just delighted to meet everyone and be here and just feel the energy of people who are so committed to botany. And I was talking to wherever she went from the TV, and I just feel like I'm a geek among geeks, and I'm just so happy to be here. And so I'm really happy to help celebrate the 120th anniversary of the New England Botanical Club. And so here's where I have to revert back to my cheat sheets. And so as I'm thinking about the New England Botanical Club and the many other societies that are represented here today, and the fact that we're all at this lovely meeting, and it just makes me ponder, why do we do this, right? Why do we belong to scientific societies? And why do we come to meetings in this digital age with so many different options for sharing information and distributing and learning and being in touch with each other? Why do we come here? Why do we interact with each other in this way? Why did we travel all the way here to Northampton? Why will I get on a plane and fly to Edmonton later this summer to go to the botany meetings? We can put all of our talks on YouTube, right? It saves practicing your talk, 50 times before you're ready to stand up here and give it, right? We might as well put our best performances up there. But we don't do that. That's not the way we share information with each other. So I became very interested in the role of scientific societies for modern science and really for the lives of botanists. And to explore this question of why we belong to scientific societies, I began asking a more general question about what are scientific societies, or more generally, they're often referred to as learned societies. And so as you begin looking these things up, so I began asking, what is a learned society? And so you can find a lot of different definitions of learned societies. So they're knowledge networks created to provide, maybe it's better if I stand back here. They're knowledge networks created to provide a forum for learned individuals to share and discuss knowledge and discoveries. They're primarily concerned with the pursuit of knowledge and its dissemination to a wider audience. They're organizations that promote interaction between scholars. They publish the proceedings of their meetings, journals, reports, and outstanding investigations by their members. They also award prizes, encourage or subsidize research, and maintain libraries. They're voluntary organizations of individuals dedicated to scholarship and research, often focused on a particular subject or method. Go plants. And as we look through all of these definitions, some of the common themes include this idea of networks, of knowledge, that we disseminate knowledge, we exchange knowledge, we share knowledge, and really this emphasis on the interaction among individuals. And so this is a really great definition of a modern scientific society. These are things that we all engage in. But where does this come from, right? How did this whole enterprise originate? And so I became interested in the actual origin of scientific societies, or more generally, learned societies. And most historiographies of scientific societies or learned societies trace their origin back to Naples in 1560. So the first scientific society was founded by a man named, and I'm going to just mangle a whole bunch of words here in rapid succession in the next couple of slides. So this learned society, the Academia Secretorium Naturi, was founded by Giambattista della Porta. I could get the della Porta, I think. And he invited people into his home and membership, the invitation to his home, membership was open to all who could present a new fact in natural science. And so this was a group who really cared about knowledge and came together to discuss and share knowledge. And it was open to all. But actually the Catholic Church got wind of this, and Della Porta was ordered by Pope Paul V to close his academy in 1578 under suspicion of sorcery. But knowledge doesn't stay in check for long, so some 50 years later, another academy was founded, this time in Rome, by Federico Sessi. And this was the Accademia dei Lincei, and the Academy of the Lynx. And this was named for the lynx, an animal whose sharp vision symbolizes the observational prowess that science requires. And so in this case, the activities of this society were actually recorded, written down, and shared. And the purpose of the society was the acquisition of wisdom and knowledge of things, and the announcement of these to men by both word and voice. And in addition to sharing knowledge, these men, and sorry ladies, this is going to be almost entirely a history of men, they undertook actual projects and investigations there in this group, and kept members who were unable to attend, kept them informed by their written record. And so really what was created in this Academy of the Lynx was a community of scholars in free and open contact. And just by way of example, there were many prominent members. Galileo was among them. And so this academy inspired the establishment of learned societies across Europe. And these were groups of people everywhere who gathered locally to discuss science and to share knowledge. And so if we sort of go over to England now, the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge was founded in 1660 by a royal charter from King Charles II. And I should say that although this was established by a royal charter, the Royal Society, it was not and never has been supported by the government, and most learned societies, it's very rare that any learned society throughout the ages is actually supported by any government. These are largely volunteer organizations. And so the Royal Society began from a small group of physicians and natural philosophers who began meeting at various locations around London, including Gresham College, which I have illustrated here. And these men met weekly to discuss science, to run experiments, to demonstrate new scientific devices, and also importantly for the reading of papers by members, but also papers that they received from abroad to keep everyone abreast. And these were men of the Enlightenment. These were men that understood that they could create new knowledge. They could come together and understand something that had never been known before. And this was very different. This is very different from what went on in universities, which was mostly sort of the transmission of received wisdom. And the Society's motto, something like nullius in verba, is Latin for take nobody's word for it. And it signifies the fellows' determination to establish facts by experimentation and observation. I just want to take a little segue to talk about the first book ever published by the Royal Society. And this was this book, Silva, that was published by John Evelyn, one of the founding members of the Royal Society, and this has a botanical link. And there was an interesting note published in Nature not very long ago by Gabriel Henry about this book, Silva. And I just want to read you a little paragraph from Henry's essay, because I think I can't paraphrase it any better than he wrote it. So he writes, 350 years ago, London's recently formed Royal Society, the body of the heart of the Enlightenment, published its first book. It was written not by Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, or any of the other luminaries of the 17th century experimental, lost my place, any of the other luminaries of 17th century experimental philosophy, but by another founding member of the society, the prodigious public servant John Evelyn. And its subject was not anatomy, astronomy, chemistry, or optics, but forestry. Silva is a practical treatise on silviculture and an enduring classic, published in 4 editions during Evelyn's lifetime and posthumously in a further 6 up until 1825. It remained the dominant forestry treatise in English until the 19th century, and thanks to its rich language, remains a favorite among tree experts. And it's interesting that this book, Silva, was written in response to the Royal Navy's need about its concern about timber shortages. So the members of the Royal Society, this learned society, came together to think about trees and how we provide timber for the Royal Navy. All right, so I've just told you about the first publication of the Royal Society, a book, Silva. But interestingly, it was during this time of the Enlightenment that the scientific journal, as we know it, originated. Journals were created during this time to share information among members of the society and share that information broadly, and also to receive information from abroad from other interested groups. And importantly, journals became a permanent repository of information. And this close relationship between learned societies and journals has been critical to the stability of journals and science over the centuries. Societies are sustained by groups of individuals who care passionately about their science, and for this reason, they maintain, they curate the collections of their works in these journals, and so they've provided this very stable, dependable repository over the years. At this time, however, it was not at all clear that journals should become a respectable outlet for knowledge, let alone a permanent outlet for knowledge. At this time, scholars wrote books. They wrote treatises. They wrote tomes of knowledge. And at that time, the word journal, the word periodical, didn't even exist as a noun to describe a type of publication. The kind of thing that the word that we sort of think of now, a periodical publication, was thought of as very ephemeral. They were broadsheets, they were gossip sheets, they were newspapers, and they were never meant to have a permanent life. It was so, what's the word I want? It's just so surprising that journals became this permanent repository that a scholar of that time, Johns, wrote in 2000, why should anyone interested in producing secure knowledge ever think to do so by means of a transient publication such as this? And the answer is that it was this really important synergy of need between these learned societies, such as the Royal Society, and the printers. So clearly, the Royal Society and the many other learned societies that were developing around this time needed a way for rapid and international communication. They wanted to be able to communicate with each other, they wanted to be able to send their discoveries abroad, they wanted to be able to receive information from abroad, and they wanted to do it quickly. Printers, on the other hand, were in a real financial bind. So at the time, things were communicated in books, and there was no such thing as copyright. So a printer would go to all the trouble of typesetting one of these tomes and get it printed, and as soon as it was on the market, the other printers could take it, copy it, print it, send it, and sell it on their own. And then you buy a book, you've got the book, you don't need another book. Right, so printers were having a hard trouble making a living, but journals aren't, so you typeset a journal and you put it out, it's not worth someone else's time to plagiarize it because another one's coming along and another one's coming along. And you buy this issue of the journal, you need the next journal, the next issue. So it was a very dependable source of income for publishers. And so this synergy of needs produced the scientific journal as we know it today. So by the mid-1700s then, we have many different learned societies in England and across Europe. We have the establishment of a number of journals as a means of sharing information among and within these societies. We have a mail system that works reasonably well to move this information around. And so by this time, the middle of the 1700s, you could basically sit in your armchair and read about exploration, read about experimentation. You could correspond and exchange ideas with like-minded people. You really didn't have to go to a meeting, but people did. People continued to go to meetings and form societies and meet in the name of science. And so I just want to give you a couple more examples of more local societies that were established. And my first example comes from the Midlands of England in Birmingham, and the dates here 1765 to 1813. And so these were a group of men interested in basic science and natural history. Most of them were businessmen, and their science had a practical focus. They were interested in improving manufacturing, improving machinery, building canals. And in some histories, actually, the Industrial Revolution is said to begin with this group of men. And so these men, again, they were professionals, they had day jobs, and so they met at night to actually discuss their science. And they tended to meet during the full moon because they had to travel sometimes long distances to go to these meetings, and the full moon would light their way home in these days before street lighting. And so they cheerfully referred to themselves as lunatics because they met on the full moon. And so again, these were very prominent people. I'm sure you've heard of many of them, including Matthew Bolton, who along with, I'm going to forget now.
James Watt.
Thank you, James Watt. I told you I had to stick close to my notes here. Matthew Bolton, who along with James Watt invented the steam engine. Joseph Priestley, who experimented with electricity and discovered oxygen. And Erasmus Darwin, who was a natural philosopher, inventor, great botanist, and the grandfather of Charles Darwin. But again, you can see that all of these men were professionals with busy lives, and yet meeting in person to discuss science was important enough for them to travel quite some distance through the dark night to meet with one another to talk about science. Gatherings of working class folks, such as colliers, weavers, and so forth, were also common. And interestingly, these were predominantly centered on botany. And these men typically met in pubs because these were working class men, and their personal homes didn't have a parlor or someplace where people could meet, and so the pubs were public spaces where they could get together to look at plants and identify plants and share information about plants. And although drink wasn't mandatory, there's an interesting quote from this lovely article called Science in the Pub, where one person says, "My specimens always look best through a glass." And so these pub groups, these pub botany groups, usually had a membership fee, and that the dues were used to create libraries. And so this book, Botanical Arrangement of the Vegetables by William Withering, was one of the most common books in these pub libraries. And William Withering was the first person to bring the Linnaean type of classification to public access, to widespread access. And so this book tended to be on most pub shelves. And these pubs often also housed herbaria that people could use as references to identify their plants. And by the, in the early 19th century, these botanical gatherings in pubs were so well established that when the government of England passed the Seditious Meetings Act, in which they were trying to prevent political gatherings, radical reformers would meet in pubs under the pretense that they were botanists. Okay, and then moving to London and sort of going on this theme of more local learned societies, another informal society then was meeting in London. And so we're here, middle of the 1800s. So by this time, the Proceedings of the Royal Society has been in print for over 200 years, right? So again, there's this well-established means of sharing scientific information among people. And the mail was dependable. It was easy to get, relatively easy to get, at least for gentlemen, access to this kind of information. Yet these informal learned societies continue to form and meet regularly in London to facilitate more intimate discussions among people. And a really well-known example of this kind of informal learned society was the X Club, which is not to be confused with the X-Men, which were a team of mutant superheroes. But these were scientific superheroes in my mind. They were all members of the Royal Society, but again, valued each other's company, and so met regularly in London, united by a devotion to science, pure and free, untrammeled by religious dogmas. And this is significant because this was right around the time that The Origin of Species was published. And so one of the topics of frequent conversation among the X-Men or the X Club was evolution and the evidence of evolution. So they had this focus on scientific thought, but also really importantly, and which makes them heroes in my mind, is that they had this key aim to make the practice of science professional. And so it was due to their efforts that there came to be paid professional positions as to do science. And I'm sure you'll recognize the founding members, Thomas Huxley, Joseph Hooker, and then I'm sure you'll recognize some of the other names among these founding members. And I should say that not only at this time, not only was there no profession as scientist, there was no such word as scientist. The word didn't exist as these men became active. The word scientist was actually coined in around 1840 at a meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science by William Whewell. Before this time, people who did science were referred to as natural philosophers or sometimes men of science. So science as we know it today was really born in these academies and these learned societies that originated beginning around the middle of the 17th century. And I think it's really interesting to understand that science did not originate in the universities. Universities at this time were moribund institutions. Learning was by rote. You memorized the classics. You parroted back what your professor told you if he showed up. And so science, this acquisition of new knowledge, was generated in societies, in meetings of individuals, where discussions and creation of new knowledge can occur. And the very notion of faculty as members of the academy, the words academic and academician derives from the association of new knowledge creation with learned academies and societies. Meanwhile, on the other side of the pond, we were not sleeping, and so even way before the United States came into existence, people were hungry for knowledge. In 1739, the botanist John Bartram made the first proposal to form a general scientific society. But it took Benjamin Franklin to do this successfully. So Franklin founded the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, and he writes, so his inspiration in forming this new learned society, he writes, "The first drudgery of settling new colonies is now pretty well over, and there are many in every province and circumstance that set them at ease and afford leisure to cultivate the finer arts and improve the common stock of knowledge." And so he formed this society, and this was not a scientific society, a general society for learned individuals to come and discuss ideas, so included people from a variety of professions, including doctors, lawyers, clergymen, merchants, artisans, etc. And you'll recognize many of the founders of the United States among its founding members. Interestingly, though, membership was and continues to be only by election. John Adams in Boston could not let Philadelphia get ahead of him, so he convinced the Massachusetts legislature to establish the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1780 with the purpose to cultivate every art and science which may tend to advance the interest, honor, dignity, and happiness of a free, independent, and virtuous people. But again, this is a learned, general learned society, also exclusive and by election, and including a lot of the same people in the founding membership. Yeah, so I said that already. Okay, so these two early American learned societies were general societies and also reasonably exclusive. But as the country grew, as the diversity of interests grew, and the means of people grew, there was a need really for a society that was both more focused on science, but also more inclusive. And so the American Association for the Advancement of Science was founded in 1848 to focus on science, but membership was open to all. And so in the constitution of the AAAS, it says, "The objects of the association are by periodical and migratory meetings to promote intercourse between those who are cultivating science in different parts of the United States." And I think this is really important, this idea of migratory meetings, right? Because the very constitution of the AAAS recognizes that meetings are critical to science. They're critical to interactions of people doing science, but this is a big, big country, and so those meetings really have to get out of New England, and move around the country a bit so that everyone has the opportunity to participate. And then it goes on to say, to give a stronger and more general impulse and a more systematic direction to scientific research in our country, and to procure for the labors of scientific men increased facilities and a wider usefulness. So there's also now an emphasis not only on science, but sort of a look outward to the needs of society, science serving the society. And so I'm going to tell you a story that I think is a really fabulous indication of the dedication of this society to inclusivity of its members. And so in 1872, Asa Gray was elected president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and I'm sure all of you have at least heard of Asa Gray. He's a very renowned and influential botanist who was the director of the herbarium at Harvard, and a good friend of Charles Darwin's and early supporter of his evolutionary theory, at least eventually. So Gray was elected president of the Academy in 1872, and that meeting was planned to be held in San Francisco. So this is 1872. The Transcontinental Railroad had only been completed in 1869. So this is only 3 years after there was even a way to contemplate traveling across the country. he didn't think twice. He's going to get on a train and he's going to travel 3,000 miles to go give that presidential address because it's so important that people meet together and exchange ideas, and it's so important that this meeting travel around so that people can come. Unfortunately, the AAAS couldn't quite negotiate some good cheap train fares with the railroad, so they split the difference and met in Iowa. So it was still a good gesture. All right, so from here, I'm going to talk a little bit about, so my narrative in the New World has been this sort of increasing specialization, and so now we have a gathering of scientists at the AAAS, and now this sort of a need, or at least a perceived need, for more specialization. So in 1883, the members of the AAAS who were interested in plants formed the Botanical Club of America, which was a section of the AAAS, formerly Section G of the AAAS. And so from 1883, for another 10 years or so, they continued to meet under the auspices of AAAS. But around 1892, at one of these meetings, Professor L.H. Bailey, another renowned botanist, whose name I'm sure you've heard, suggested that a new society of botanists should be established to unify and subserve the botanical interests of the country. So they're thinking about breaking away from the AAAS and forming their own society. And so he was asked to chair a committee to investigate the formation of an American Botanical Society. And so Bailey goes off with his charge, due diligence, he convenes his committee, they have a discussion, they vote, they make a recommendation, and the committee votes 8-2 to recommend against forming an independent society. And so see if this reminds you of meetings that you've been to, right? So you go into the meeting, you say, well, you know, I formed a committee, we talked, here's all the stuff we talked about, we don't think this is a good idea. And then one of the two people who thought it was a good idea was actually at this meeting, and he was so convincing that everybody there voted to form their own society. And so the American Botanical Society was formed by this vote in 1893. So 1895 saw the first meeting of the Botanical Society of America with the aim of promoting botanical research. But interestingly, membership was by election and restricted to active researchers. So we see this sort of drift back into this exclusivity again. And this made a lot of people unhappy. And it was particularly this, the exclusivity of this botanical society. And so some members seceded and formed the Society for Plant Morphology and Physiology, really in protest. And so this society was open to anyone interested. But this also made people really unhappy because botany was fractionating, and the whole idea of having a society, a scientific society, is to bring people together who have common interests, and this was not serving that purpose. And so finally, in 1906, everyone got back together at a meeting in New Orleans and worked out their differences and recombined. So there was a union of the Botanical Society of America, the Society for Plant Morphology and Physiology, and the Mycological Society to form the Botanical Society of America, which returned to the egalitarian policies of the AAAS. Okay, so now, so I've sort of given you this arc from the nascent learned societies, the American Philosophical Society and so forth, before the United States was even a country, to the focus at the AAAS on science, to the focus on botanical science. But now we have this, we've created, even though our focus is on botany, this is still a big umbrella organization, like we saw happening, you know, way in early history of England with this big umbrella organization, maybe of the Royal Society. But then the need for these smaller, more intimate societies, the Lunar Society, the X Club, the botanists in the pubs. And so the same thing, at the same time that these larger societies, the AAAS and the botanical societies were forming, as you all know, there were more local, regional societies that were forming to fill those needs of more intimate interactions among botanists. And so, as I'm sure you all saw at the poster session, the poster of the Torrey Botanical Society it claims, and I think it's true, that it's the oldest botanical society in the US, founded in 1860 by Professor John Torrey to promote interest in botany and collect and demonstrate information on all phases of plant life. And so, and this society, a local society, included amateurs, which as far as I understand, had a different meaning then than it does now, in that it wasn't the degree of knowledge, but whether you were actually employed as a botanist or not. Students and colleagues who are interested in actually getting out there and collecting and identifying plants, right? So really doing botany. Also included our host for today, the New England Botanical Club, organized in 1895 by William Farlow. Also established for the promotion of social intercourse and the dissemination of local and general information interested in the flora of New England. And again, an inclusive membership. The point was to get together and do plants, to really understand plants. And this is I quickly realized that this is not an exhaustive list of societies that are represented here today. But you can see this sort of interest and need for local organizations, but gathered around the same principles of camaraderie, sharing information, learning from each other. And so, oh, I know. So I was looking around for, and I'm not going to tell you anything more about the history of any of these more local societies, because you all know much more about New England and its botanical societies than I do. But I was looking around to see if I could find some old photographs of some of the field trips and so forth that were sponsored by these societies, and I wasn't very successful. So if anybody has these, it would be really fun if you were able to share them. But I did find a couple these kinds of photos in early issues of Rhodora, and so you can see some of the members surmounting, however you say that, here, and you know, their vehicle traveling up these roads, and it gives you just such a great sense of the sense of discovery and exploration that came from these meetings of these of the Botanical Club and so forth. So I just thought that was a great photograph. Okay, but that was then, right? So I sort of told you where scientific societies had their origin and the genesis of just a few, given the time that we have, and some of the motivations, historical motivations that people had for engaging in meetings of learned societies. But this is today, right? I mean, so we have, where's my pointer? We have journals. We've had journals now for 300 years, but we don't have to wait for the mail anymore. You can get all of the articles that you need online. If you can't find them online, you can share them through one of the article sharing sites. So we reach each other that way. All the botanical organizations have websites that are just full of information and ways that we can talk to each other. There's social media. We all have social media. We can immediately know information. Somebody finds, you know, this is blooming there. You have to go find it. You have to go see it. You can tweet it. You can Skype with your friends, right? And so we have all this means of being together. But still we come here, which I think is just fantastic. So just to close, so I began by wondering why we come. I don't have an answer for you, but as I said, I just think it's terrific that we do. From the Royal Society to the Lunar Society to the X Club to the various societies that we belong to, we come to meetings. Certainly we all want to share information and research with other scientists, naturalists, and educators. But the heart and soul of the society, what makes us attend meetings, is shared fellowship. You heard us. Elizabeth couldn't get us to shut up, right? I mean, so we come for those conversations. We come to make personal contacts. We come to share ideas and information. We come to experience that completely unexpected and unsought insight that comes from serendipitous interactions for intense, sustained conversations that occur out there in the lobby. We come to work through experiments over a beer, to better understand our own data, to figure out how someone else did that, how someone else taught that. Over 450 years after the initial gathering at the home of Della Porta in Naples, gatherings are still part of the essence of science. The same impulse that drew the lunar men out into the dark night or Asa Gray to contemplate a 3,000-mile journey at the dawn of the Transcontinental Railroad draws us to meetings such as this. So at meetings, I always ask, why are you here? And almost every response includes, make new connections, reconnect with friends and colleagues. So sure, we can interact and collaborate online, and we do, but we're not avatars. And so we belong to societies and we come to meetings. And it was true in 1560 and it's true today. And I'm hopeful and sometimes confident that it will be true into the future. So while innovative and technology in the digital world are clearly critical to science, it's societies and meetings that make us complete as scientists and as botanists. So I'm really glad you're all here. Thank you.
One thing that just was kind of gone to my head and I'm curious about is, I'll say a learned society versus a club that specifically really is only interested in that camaraderie. I don't know if you put any thought or how does that differ? And then I kind of, just in terms of maybe where our society is going now, if that is coming into the plant world as well, but thoughts?
Yeah, it seems like they're hard to, as you were asking the question, I was thinking, well, I guess there are, sort of societies that are purely camaraderie, like drinking clubs or something like that. But, usually groups of people come together around something that they enjoy doing. And so, what a lot of us enjoy doing is identifying plants. And, but whether coming together to identify plants is an excuse to be together and drink beer, or drinking beer is just a really good thing to do while you're looking at plants, or or it's a way, I don't know, I don't have an answer, but I think it's a really important. We plan to talk tomorrow morning about societies and recruitment, and I have to hope that just if you can get people out into the field. To sort of experience what happens when you're out in the field with a bunch of botanists, is one, I can't help but think that that's a way to perpetuate it, but I don't know. And how you get them out there, I don't know either. When a friend of mine calls it the praying mantis. You said people are plant blind, and you got to get them to look out. Yeah.
The friendship and the fellowship is definite, and I certainly hugely value that. But I was thinking about another one as I saw you go through and saw so many former people and what a rough time they had. They were persecuted by the church and various groups. And I don't think that's totally over yet. In other words, sort of another reason why we need to support each other is there's still a lot of opposition to science. There's the climate change deniers, there's all sorts. We're coming up just in a few weeks to the 90th anniversary of the Scopes trial. And recently, a newspaper investigator went down to see what it's like now, and he said the attitudes are largely modified, you know, and so one can still run up against these things, and therefore we need these learned societies to support one another and stand for the truth.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it seems like we can spin many ways. I mean, some of us are, you know, accomplished spokespeople on our own, and some of us are not, you know, but if we can contribute to a body that can have a voice, or contribute our knowledge to, you know, the one or two among us who's a really good spokesperson, but also a way to disseminate information. I know we have a TV here who will take our message out into the local area. But I think that I think it's a really good point. But I think it's a really good reminder. It's our responsibility to be spokespeople. It's our responsibility to reach out so that people aren't plant blind, and so people really understand the critical role of understanding plants in the face of climate change and their key, you know, central role in the ecosystem. And I was just talking earlier about, you know, just the sort of unexpected things that a meeting like this, where people are really bringing information from all different angles, where you learn things that you just wouldn't. You know, it's not on my radar to find out, you know, certain things, but I'm here and I hear them, and they're going to stay with me and influence the way I think and the way I teach and the way I communicate. In the back.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was a great talk on history. And I just want to say tomorrow, I really hope that all the younger members or younger attendees participate in the meeting, because some of you are going to become the future leaders of these societies, and two, I think you're going to have some fresh ideas that we need to keep these societies going. So
yeah, go on.
I think not only actively participate tomorrow, don't just listen, because I think you'll have a lot to add.
In the back? In the blue shirt in the back?
James.
Hi. Man, I'm wondering if you think there's an ideal size for these societies. It seems like over history they've grown from, you know, a dozen individuals to many thousands. And at that point, it becomes more difficult to sort of keep these personal connections alive and even find these people.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think the answer is to belong to a lot of societies, you know, because I think the kinds of things that we can do here, you know, the field trips and the monthly meetings and that sort of thing, you can't do on a large scale, you know, but then there's a place for, you know, the Ecological Society of America, which I think is, I don't know how, there's like 5,000 people at a meeting, which ends up being, you know, lots of little sub-meetings. Yeah, I don't have a good answer except to, you know, support and be actively involved in, you know, a variety of different societies to sort of feed your need. So, yeah, in the gray.
I'm going to just touch on maybe the elephant hidden in your PowerPoint slides a little bit. I noticed that there's a lot of mention of a lot of these clubs trying to work towards inclusivity for men. I was wondering if you had any perception of when societies finally broke the gender barrier and started allowing women in. Who was it? Who did that? What fields were dominating? Was the gender barrier broken inside societies much later than in other fields? As someone who's really interested in
yeah, you know, I don't have the dates offhand, but I know that botany's always been relatively inclusive, and it's sort of an interesting, you know, it's you know, studying animal parts is sort of indelicate, but it was okay for women to study plant parts, even the sex parts, and so botany was kind of an, you know, an okay way for women to, you know, to do botany. And I know that, so I did know this and I've forgotten, there was a woman who was president of the BSA in around the 30s, and I don't think that they were ever excluded from the Botanical Society, but I don't know.
Can I give you your example?
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, anybody who knows, hop in.
Vermont Botanical Bird Club is 120 years old, and Nellie Flynn was one of the founding members.
And the Torrey Botanical Club is almost 160 75 years old, and it was formed by women, and it was 45% women from the beginning.
Yes!
And on the flip side, the New England Botanical Club did not allow women to be members. They could attend meetings, but they couldn't become members until 1966. Men relinquished their membership because of that decision.
Women were not as kind of woman president very early on.
Anybody else have a comment about that question before we move on?
New England Wildflower Society, 115 years old, was founded primarily by women.
By the women who were not allowed. So there was a real benefit in not having women in New England Botanical Club because New England Wildflower Society was created by women.
Canadian in the back.
In Central New York, just to add to that, in Central New York, there's a botanical society that was formed by women, and men were not allowed. Just recently, I believe I saw something.
So there's a question back there.
This isn't a question about learned societies, but about botany in general. An article that came out in one of our major Canadian newspapers just about 2 weeks ago indicated the dramatic drop in the number of young people that are entering botany as a field. I would suspect, I don't know, so I would hope that everyone else could illuminate me, but that probably the statistics are similar in the United States. And so my question is, how can we encourage more young people to actually enter the field of botany in post-secondary education?
I think that's such a vital question, and it's something that we should, devote some really extensive conversation to. And I think part of it is this plant blindness, but I think part of it is PR, and that we need to do a better job. But I think partly, what happened around the 70s or so is that we had institutions, so I'm thinking like an academic, sorry, that's what I am. So departments were organized along organisms, right? And they were very vertically organized, so you could learn about plants from molecules to, cells and tissues to individuals to ecology, the whole thing. And then that disappeared and things went horizontal, right? And so you were in ecology departments or cell biology departments or genetics departments. And so there isn't a thing called botany anymore. So if somebody's really interested in plants, so a lot of you probably have kids who are in high school or who have chosen colleges, right? And you can do a search on botany, right? So if you've got a kid who's just really interested in plants, and they'll get nothing, right? Because these search engines look for names of departments. There are not departments of botany. So if you're interested in plants, it's really hard to know what to do with that, right? Where do you go? What do you do if you're interested in plants? And you can still learn a whole lot about plants in a lot of different universities, right? There's still a lot of plant biology being taught, but it's being taught all over the place. And if you already know that you're interested in plants, you can't find those places. And general biology courses, of course, do a terrible job teaching about plants. So it's hard to get kids in. But I think it's just a way that science has been redefined, and so it's hard for people to find it. And so I think we need to do a much better PR job of telling people how to learn this information. And I was at a meeting earlier this spring at the U.S. Botanic Gardens, which is a federal institution, and like all federal institutions, has to hire through the federal system, right? And so the federal government, the United States federal government, has a definition, has a job called botanist, and it's defined. And you must know this, right? It's defined the way the federal government is going to define a botanist, which is defined by having X number of course hours in botany. Well, nobody teaches botany, right? And so you could be, you could have a degree in biology, and you could have taken many hours of botany. You could know a lot of botany, but you can't get a job as a botanist. So he was showing me there was like 70 or 80 jobs. These are good, well-paying, full-time jobs called botanist, and they can't find people to take them because, I mean, it's something that you know, it seems like we as botanists ought to be able, you know, and this is a small, I mean, this is a really small answer to that problem, but a way to sort of certify botanical expertise and at least be able to, you know, employ the kids that have some training, and it's just so broken.
I think one important thing, though, is that informal science institutions are really stepping into that reach, like botanical gardens, like environmental centers.
A really excellent point.
Beginning to not only start to entice, you know, kids, you know, and young adults into the study of nature,
right?
Which of course is the study of plants, but also giving training, training for teachers and professional development programs and certificate programs and things that give teachers, formal science educators, the confidence to actually get out in the field and teach their
absolutely,
kids with
absolutely. Because what I was talking about is, you know, people that are already interested in plants, but cultivating that interest in young kids is just critical.
One more question.
I'd like to follow up on the comment the gentleman to my left made earlier about supporting one another. And I'd like to suggest that botanical clubs, or perhaps their members, be more advocates for protection and research and funding for plants. Folks here may or may not be aware, there is absolutely no federal funding for plants other than federally listed plants. There is tons of funding for animals, zero for plants for the federal government. So state government is stretched in hiring botanists because most of the wildlife biologists and fisheries biologists are on federal funds. The botanists there's no federal funds for it, so they're all either on soft money, or they don't exist, or you know, they have them off doing other things. And the public, I mean, the members of these clubs need to be strong advocates and need to make this known that plants are important to them. They're just as important as animals. I think more important, but
that's what your bias rule. All right, well with that, I just want to give Pam a huge